Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a corner of mythology that most history teachers would never bother to mention, but which is perfect for bedtime. You're going to find yourself standing right next to Athena, goddess of wisdom, strategy, and, apparently, random side hobbies. Because in a moment, she's about to invent an instrument no one really asked for, the humble flute. Yes, the very same Athena, who engineers clever war tactics, also once sat down and thought, what if I blow into this hollow bone and call it music? You probably won't survive this concert, at least not without a chuckle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening somewhere cozy, let me know in the comments. Where in the world are you, and what time is it for you right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by picturing Athena pacing, restless after yet another council of the gods. She's surrounded by endless harp melodies, the clatter of lyres, and those dramatic choruses the muses won't stop belting out. It's all grand and glorious, but she wants something sharper, something that cuts through like a spear point. One day, as she walks along the riverbank, she picks up a hollow bone left behind by a bird of prey. To most mortals, it's just a bone. To Athena, it's a new battlefield, waiting for invention. She puts it to her lips, blows, and out comes a sound that's half shriek, half whistle, like the very first attempt of a toddler on a plastic recorder. The air vibrates strangely. Unlike the smooth strum of a lyre, the noise feels piercing, almost unsettling. You can imagine Athena tilting her head, intrigued by the rawness of it. She carves holes in the bone, using her sharp spear tip as a tool. The goddess of strategy approaches even music like a tactician. Measure, puncture, test. Soon she's got a rudimentary flute, and when she plays again, the sound wobbles into something you might call a melody, though only if you're being very generous. Historically, flutes really do appear among the oldest instruments humans created. Archaeologists have found Paleolithic bone flutes, some over 35,000 years old, made from bird bones and mammoth tusks. Imagine that. Long before Athens even existed, some anonymous hunter was already poking holes in bones and trying out a tune. Athena, in myth, steps into that same long tradition, as though the gods themselves had to get in on the act. But here's where the quirky tidbit sneaks in. In some versions of the myth, the very first flute Athena crafts isn't bone at all, but a double reed instrument, more like an aulos than a modern flute. Picture two pipes jammed in your mouth at once, cheeks puffing like a chipmunk after a walnut binge. Not exactly glamorous for a goddess who prides herself on dignity. Historians still argue whether the myth refers to an actual flute, or whether later storytellers muddled it with the aulos, two instruments with very different reputations. One belongs in gentle pastoral scenes, the other in noisy street parties. Athena, though, doesn't care about mortal confusion. She takes her creation back to Olympus. She wants to impress, maybe even rival Apollo, the golden boy of music himself. You can almost hear her whisper, "Move over, sun god. I've got something sharper than your fancy harp." And with that, she raises the flute to her lips again. The first note pierces the air, wobbling strange, carrying echoes of river reeds and bird cries. Imagine yourself standing there in the Hall of the Gods, the marble columns ringing with this odd sound. It doesn't fit the setting. Olympus is used to grand harmonies, not this raw shrillness. But Athena is convinced. Her eyes gleam, and you sense the spark of invention. She's not here for beauty. She's here for novelty, for something that cuts across expectations. And yet, as you listen longer, you realize this is the beginning of a myth, not about triumph, but about failure. That first awkward note is like a pebble dropped in still water. The ripples will reach far. Mortals will pick up the instrument. Satyrs will claim it. Philosophers will complain about it. But for now, you're just there at the start, a goddess holding a bone, blowing into it like a curious child, hoping the noise will make the world stop and notice. The hall grows quiet, her invention echoes, and you, caught in the soft hum of Olympus, already know this is going to be less about glorious music and more about the embarrassment waiting to come. Still, for tonight, it's enough to watch her carve, blow, and smile faintly at the strange new voice she's released into the air. You're still standing in that gleaming hall of Olympus, and Athena raises her brand-new flute to her lips again. This time, she blows harder, determined to coax out something musical. What drifts through the air isn't exactly beautiful. It's high-pitched, nasal, and just a little bit wheezy. Imagine the sound of someone testing a smoke alarm, except stretched into what Athena insists is a tune. You almost want to cover your ears, but you resist, because this is a once-in-eternity performance. The other gods glance at one another. Apollo, lounging nearby with his golden lyre, raises an eyebrow. He plucks one perfect, honey-smooth chord. Just to remind everyone what real music sounds like. But Athena isn't intimidated. She keeps at it, puffing her cheeks, sliding her fingers over the tiny holes, convinced she's producing a melody fit for the heavens. Here's the thing. The Olympians aren't exactly known for tact. Zeus coughs into his beard, trying to cover a chuckle. Hera hides a smirk behind her hand. Hermes, always the prankster, leans over to Dionysus and whispers something that makes them both snort with laughter. To Athena's ears, though, it must sound revolutionary. She's so wrapped up in her own focus that she doesn't see the glances being exchanged. Historically, the flute, or rather the aulos, did have a reputation for producing a sound that was sharper and more forceful than stringed instruments. Ancient writers often described it as wild, intoxicating, almost too stirring for calm settings. Soldiers marched to its piercing notes. Festival crowds danced themselves into frenzies. So Athena's experiment isn't far off the mark. It really would have sounded alien compared to Apollo's stately lyre. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some ancient depictions show musicians using leather straps tied around their heads to keep their cheeks from puffing too much when playing. Picture that. An accessory designed to prevent chipmunk voice. Not exactly the glamorous Olympian look. You can imagine Hermes, in that moment, already sketching the idea of tying straps around Athena's head just to get another laugh. Historians still argue whether the myth of Athena's flute was originally meant as comic relief, a way to poke fun at her otherwise serious image, or whether it symbolized a real cultural debate between stringed instruments and reed pipes. Either way, the awkwardness of her first notes hangs in the air like smoke that won't quite dissipate. You lean in, listening. The melody wobbles, a strange mixture of shrill and mournful, like a goose honking its way through a lullaby. Athena frowns slightly. Not at the laughter, she hasn't noticed that yet, but at the challenge of controlling the sound. She adjusts her grip, shifts her stance, blows again. Another screech rings out, followed by something almost resembling a scale. Almost. At this point, if you were a mortal invited to Olympus for the night, you'd probably be quietly inching toward the door. Not because it's unbearable, but because it's, well, a lot. Like being stuck in a room with someone testing out karaoke for the first time. You want to be supportive, but you also want to sleep. Still, Athena is undeterred. She sees herself not just as a musician, but as an innovator. Every awkward squeak is, in her mind, a step toward something greater. And to her credit, that stubborn persistence is part of what made her famous. She never backs down, not even from embarrassment. The gods, however, are restless. Apollo strums again, clearly showing off. A perfect note fills the air, silken and balanced. Athena shoots him a glare. You can almost hear her thinking, "Liars are old news. Get with the times." And in that moment, you realize this myth is really about clashing aesthetics. Apollo embodies harmony, calm, and order. Athena wants sharpness, energy, and experimentation. It's like comparing a grand piano recital to a kid with an electric guitar. Both have value, but one clearly rattles the chandeliers more than the other. For you, standing there in the marble glow of Olympus, the scene is half absurd comedy, half fascinating history. A goddess puffing her cheeks red for the sake of invention, while the immortals around her try desperately not to laugh out loud. The flute may not have found glory yet, but it's already made its mark. It has unsettled the smug calm of divine music. And somewhere, tucked away in the corner, Dionysus is grinning. You suspect he's already plotting how to make this noisy little instrument the star of his next wild procession. The air on Olympus is usually thick with wine scent, harp strings, and the hum of muses rehearsing for some cosmic pageant. Tonight, though, the mood has shifted. The marble pillars catch and echo the sound of Athena's flute like it's being tested in a tiled bathroom. You can practically feel the gods' collective patience wobble with each squeal. Athena, for her part, is convinced she's just about to unlock something divine. She blows again, this time pressing her fingers more carefully on the holes she carved. The note bends, warbles, then stabilizes for a brief, shining moment before cracking into what can only be described as goose on a roller coaster. To her ears, it's progress. To everyone else, it's comedy. Apollo leans back, plucks a single string on his lyre, and lets the perfect tone ring out. He doesn't even need to say anything. The contrast is brutal. Velvet versus sandpaper. The muses shift nervously. They're technically supposed to encourage all the arts, but they're also Olympic critics. One of them coughs politely, as if to ask, "Are we done yet?" Historically, this contrast makes sense. The Greeks associated Apollo's lyre with balance, discipline, and civilized order. The flute, or aulos, belonged to Dionysus, chaos, and ecstatic revelry. The two instruments represented opposite forces in Greek thought, head versus heart, calm versus frenzy. And Athena, goddess of wisdom, has, perhaps unwisely, planted herself right in the middle of this tug-of-war. Here's the quirky bit. Ancient vase paintings sometimes show flute players being hired for parties, and they weren't always treated with respect. They were necessary for the fun, sure, but not glamorous. More like the equivalent of being the guy who controls the aux cord at a college house party. So when Athena insists her invention deserves divine honor, you can imagine the other gods trying not to laugh at the idea. You watch Hermes lean over again, whispering something snide to Apollo. Apollo doesn't even smirk. He's too dignified. But Dionysus bursts out with a bark of laughter. He claps his hands like a man already picturing how this weird new sound might fit into one of his torchlit parades. Athena notices the reaction now. Her brows knit, and she lowers the flute for a second. "You don't understand," she says. Her voice is calm, but her pride is pricked. "This isn't just noise. This is strategy. Music that pierces, cuts, wakes the soul." She brings the flute back up as if to prove the point. Another squeak follows. Zeus lets out a cough that sounds suspiciously like a laugh muffled in his beard. Historians still argue whether the myth of Athena's flute was meant to show her human side, her capacity to make mistakes, or whether it was a cautionary tale about stepping outside your divine lane. After all, she's the goddess of wisdom and warcraft, not music. Maybe this was the ancient storyteller's way of saying, even gods can't do everything. The Olympians, though, aren't dissecting philosophy. They're just trying not to choke on their ambrosia from giggling. Hera dabs her eyes with a handkerchief, pretending it's a tear of reverence. Ares leans forward, genuinely curious. After all, a sharp screeching sound might actually be useful on the battlefield. Imagine enemy soldiers scattering at the noise of a divine flute solo. It's not the worst idea he's ever heard. But most of the gods, they're unconvinced. The flute feels undignified, too raw for Olympus. You can almost hear the verdict forming in whispers. Leave this toy to mortals. Let them puff their cheeks and squeal to their heart's content. Athena, however, doesn't give up easily. She closes her eyes, focuses, and tries again. And for one brief, fragile moment, the note she plays is steady, mournful, almost beautiful. Everyone pauses. Even Apollo tilts his head. The sound is like wind through hollow reeds, like a lonely bird over the sea. Then it cracks again, sliding into shriek territory, and the moment is gone. You feel the tension in the hall, a goddess stubbornly insisting her creation matters, and a pantheon already writing it off as ridiculous. It's awkward, endearing, and more than a little funny. The gods shift in their seats, waiting to see if she'll give up. But you already know, Athena never gives up. Not yet, anyway. The echoes of Olympus fade, and you drift gently down to the mortal world, where news of Athena's strange invention begins to trickle through. Mortals have always been quick to copy the gods. When a new design falls from heaven, someone down below inevitably thinks, "Hey, I can make that." And so, shepherds in the hills, potters in their workshops, even soldiers resting after drill begin to carve their own pipes from bone and reed. Picture a shepherd leaning against a crooked olive tree. The sun sets over a rocky slope. Sheep scatter like cotton balls across the hillside. He pulls a hollow reed from the riverbank, pokes holes with his knife, and tries to blow a tune. The result? A squeal that sends a goat skittering downhill. Still, the shepherd smiles. It isn't perfect, but it keeps him company, filling the lonely silence of twilight. Historically, instruments like flutes were indeed common among rural folk. Unlike lyres, which required skilled craftsmanship, a flute could be fashioned from simple materials. Archaeologists have dug up rustic versions made of cane, bone, and even clay. They were the instruments of the everyday, small enough to tuck into a belt and light enough to play while watching over fields. Here's the quirky bit. In some places, flutes weren't just for music, but also for training animals. Certain tones supposedly calmed sheep or encouraged dogs to move in rhythm. Imagine Athena's grand invention reduced to a shepherd's sheepdog whistle. If she could see that, her divine eyebrow would arch higher than Mount Olympus itself. And yet, for mortals, the sound has its charm. Around campfires, soldiers pass the crude flutes between them. The notes are wobbly, yes, but they break the monotony of endless marching and the silence of starry nights. Potters at their wheels hum along to thin, reedy tunes, drifting from apprentices who have fashioned a flute while the clay dries. The music becomes woven into daily life, not as a grand art, but as a small comfort. Historians still argue whether the myth of Athena's flute reflects this everyday use of simple instruments, or whether it was meant to contrast divine ideals with mortal practicality. After all, what seems embarrassing to gods can become treasured by humans. A squeak in Olympus might be a lullaby in a shepherd's hut. You picture a small Athenian child tugging on their mother's robe, begging for a turn with the flute. The child blows too hard, producing a honk so absurd that even the family donkey brays in complaint. Everyone laughs, but the sound sticks in memory. Slowly, mortals begin to treat the flute not as a mistake, but as a companion instrument. Humble, yes, but theirs. In a smoky tavern, a traveling musician pulls out his reed flute and plays for coin. The melody is crooked, uneven, but it fills the gaps between conversations, like an early form of background music. Wine flows. Dice roll across tables, and the flute wails gently in the corner. Not a divine symphony, but a mortal moment. Comfortable, lived in, real. And so, without Athena realizing it, her invention is taking root below. While Olympus laughs, Earth listens. The squeak becomes part of daily rhythms, fields, firesides, markets, and marches. What is embarrassment above becomes solace below. You drift back toward Olympus, where Athena is still testing her creation. She's been at it long enough now that the other gods have grown restless. Hermes has already slipped out to chase some prank. Dionysus has wandered off in search of another cup of wine. Only a handful remain to witness what happens next. And this, unfortunately for Athena, is the moment when the problem becomes painfully obvious. She lifts the flute, places both pipes to her lips, and blows. The sound is sharp, insistent, almost hypnotic. But your eyes wander away from her hands and settle on her face. The cheeks, they puff out like bread dough, left too long to rise. Red and swollen, stretched in a most undignified fashion. For a goddess famed for poise and clarity, it's not a good look. Hera nudges Zeus with her elbow. He coughs again, suspiciously amused. Apollo keeps his composure, but you can see his shoulders trembling with suppressed laughter. Ares is less subtle. He guffaws outright, slapping his thigh, like he's just heard the best tavern joke of the century. Athena lowers the instrument for a moment, her eyes narrowing. She knows exactly what they're laughing at. Historically, depictions of the aulos do show this issue. Musicians would puff their cheeks enormously while playing, to the point that it distorted their faces. To counteract this, they sometimes wore a leather strap called a phorbea, basically an ancient mouthguard, that kept the cheeks from ballooning. It's one of those little details you don't imagine until you see it painted on a vase. Men in tunics, cheeks strapped, blowing desperately into twin pipes. Practical, yes. Elegant? Not so much. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some ancient writers claimed Athena invented the phorbea too, just so she could preserve her dignity. But the strap didn't solve everything. Her face still bulged, and the gods still snickered. For a goddess who valued her image, this was a humiliation she couldn't ignore. Historians still argue whether the myth was meant to highlight vanity, that even a goddess of wisdom could abandon a project over appearances, or whether it symbolized something deeper about instruments tied to physicality versus those tied to intellect. Whatever the case, the laughter stings. You picture Athena glancing into a polished bronze shield nearby, catching her own reflection. The cheeks, ballooned and flushed, transform her elegant profile into something cartoonish. She lowers the flute, silent now, and breathes through her nose. It's not the music that bothers her. It's the mockery. The hall has grown noisy with snickers, but you can almost feel the moment stretch out in her mind. All her pride, all her intent, now tangled up with embarrassment. Her jaw tightens. She isn't the kind of goddess to tolerate ridicule, especially not from her divine family. Still, she lifts the flute once more, determined to salvage some dignity. The note she plays is sharp, trembling with frustration. For a second, it seems she might reclaim her authority. But the cheeks swell again and the laughter ripples louder. It's the turning point. You see her lower the flute with deliberate slowness, grip tightening as though she might snap it in two. But she doesn't, at least not yet. Instead, she places it on the table, gaze fixed somewhere distant, and decides. If the instrument won't respect her image, she won't respect it. That single decision will echo far beyond Olympus. Because once Athena turns her back, others, less concerned with puffed cheeks and appearances, will gladly pick the flute up. But for now, the story belongs to her, standing stiff and silent as the gods laugh. Cheeks slowly deflating, pride bruised more than she'll ever admit. The laughter lingers in the high hall like smoke after a fire, but Athena has already gone quiet. You can almost feel her withdrawing inward, her jaw set, her shoulders stiff. This isn't the kind of goddess who breaks down or storms off in tears. No. She simmers. She stands tall, even while the last chuckles echo around her. And then, with a sharp little movement, she picks up the flute one final time. She doesn't blow into it. Instead, she studies it, turning the hollow bone between her fingers, as if reassessing whether this object deserves her attention. The curves, the carved holes, the memory of those ridiculous puffed cheeks, it's all there. She shakes her head, not slowly or regretfully, but with the crisp dismissal of someone brushing away a failed strategy. And then she tosses it aside. The flute clatters against the marble floor, skittering like a stick across stone. For a heartbeat, everyone in the room goes silent. It's not often that Athena abandons anything. She's known for patience, wisdom, careful planning. To see her discard an invention so abruptly is almost shocking. Almost. But then Ares snorts, and the moment dissolves. Historically, this rejection matches the myths exactly. Athena, embarrassed by her puffed cheeks, throws the flute away. Some say she hurled it from Olympus entirely, letting it tumble down into the mortal world. Others suggest she simply dropped it in a wooded glade, where curious eyes would later find it. Either way, the detail is clear. She wanted no part of it anymore. Here's the quirky tidbit. A few storytellers claimed Athena cursed the flute as she abandoned it. Anyone who picked it up would suffer disgrace, or at least never find true honor in playing it. And yet, people kept playing. If that curse existed, it clearly didn't work very well, unless you count all those poor school children centuries later honking away on recorders as a sign of divine punishment. Historians still argue whether Athena's rejection is really about vanity, or whether it symbolizes her refusal to embrace instruments associated with wild bodily passions. Remember, Athena is about the mind, strategy, order. The flute, linked to Dionysian frenzy and emotional abandon, just didn't fit her image. Tossing it aside may have been less about puffed cheeks and more about boundaries. This is not my domain. Still, the sound of that flute clattering on marble rings in your ears. You picture it lying there, small and unimpressive, a discarded toy in the middle of a grand hall. The gods lose interest quickly, turning back to their wine and their gossip. For them, the episode is over. For Athena, it's a bruise on her pride. Tucked away, but never forgotten. She steps away from the instrument, cloak swirling, eyes fixed ahead. She won't admit defeat, not aloud. But in the silence that follows, you realize this is a rare moment. The goddess of wisdom walking away from something she created. The invention, now abandoned, waits for someone else, anyone else to pick it up. Down below, mortals will eventually hear rumors. A goddess discarded a gift, and the earth is free to claim it. But here, in the halls of Olympus, the scene closes with a soft tension. Athena sits back on her throne, face calm again, hands folded. The flute lies on the floor, quiet, ignored, but not forgotten. You already sense it won't stay there long. The flute does not stay forgotten. That's the thing about objects left behind. They tend to attract curious hands. And in this case, the hands are not divine. They are shaggy, mischievous, and forever looking for a way to turn scraps into entertainment. Enter the satyrs. If you've never pictured one clearly, imagine a goat that decided halfway through life it wanted to be a man. Or perhaps a man who never quite gave up his goatish instincts. They are wild companions of Dionysus, half human, half animal, and fully committed to noise, laughter, and trouble. Somewhere in a sunlit glade or a shady grove, depending on which storyteller you believe, the satyrs stumble upon the discarded flute. One of them picks it up, sniffing it like a new wineskin. Another nudges him, bleating out a laugh. Then curiosity overcomes hesitation. The first satyr places the flute to his lips and blows. What happens next is chaos. Beautiful chaos, if you're the kind of creature who delights in disorder. The sound bursts out, not the disciplined, careful tones Athena once hoped for, but a raw, braying melody. The satyrs howl with delight. They pass the flute around like it's a jug of wine, each one puffing into it with less technique and more enthusiasm. Their cheeks balloon, their eyes water, their goat legs kick as the music tumbles out in fits and squeals. And just like that, the flute finds its new home, not among the gods of wisdom, but in the hands and hooves of revelers. The satyrs don't care if their faces puff. They don't care if the tones wobble or shriek. For them, the sound is perfect because it fits their world, messy, joyful, unrestrained. This shift is important. Athena rejected the flute because it undermined her dignity. The satyrs embrace it precisely because it has no dignity. They turn it into a symbol of revelry, a soundtrack to their frolics and feasts. In myth, this is where the flute begins to link itself to Dionysus, the god of wine, madness, and celebration. From a historian's perspective, this detail is fascinating. Instruments often cross social boundaries. What starts in one group's rituals can be adopted, transformed, and rebranded by another. The flute, which might have begun as a sacred invention, becomes the music of revelry, linked forever with wild festivals. That duality, order versus chaos, Athena versus Dionysus, echoes in Greek culture for centuries. Back in the grove, the satyrs keep playing. They stomp their hooves, clap their hands, and turn the forest into an impromptu stage. Nymphs peek out from between trees, curious about the raucous noise. Some laugh and join in the dancing. Others roll their eyes, unimpressed by the racket. But one thing is certain. The flute, once silent on Olympus, is alive here on earth. And the satyrs, with their wild joy, don't just keep it to themselves. They play for mortals who wander too close, luring shepherds from their flocks, or coaxing farmers into late-night dances. They spread the music wherever they go. It's no longer Athena's invention. It's theirs now, reshaped, reclaimed, reborn in laughter and wine. The gods above may not notice, but down here among the trees, something important has shifted. The flute has left the realm of strategy and pride. It now belongs to play, to frenzy, to the untamed spirit of the countryside. The question is, who else will hear it? And what will they make of it? You don't get to keep a shiny new toy in Greek myth without attracting attention, especially not when the toy happens to make sounds that carry across valleys and bounce off mountains. The satyrs, drunk on noise and their own goatish enthusiasm, parade the flute far and wide. And somewhere along the way, mortals begin to notice. It starts with shepherds. Imagine yourself trudging across a hillside with a flock of sheep who, let's be honest, aren't exactly known for riveting conversation. Suddenly, drifting on the breeze comes a piping sound, high, thin, and oddly irresistible. You follow it and discover satyrs cavorting around a fire, stomping their cloven hooves and blowing on Athena's discarded invention like it's the horn of plenty. They don't invite you politely. They beckon with wild gestures and shove a wineskin in your hand. Before long, you're clapping along, swaying off beat, and wondering how you'll ever explain to your flock why you came home smelling like fermented grapes. From there, the flute drifts into villages. Traveling herdsmen copy the sounds, trying to mimic the satyrs' tunes with reeds they cut from riverbanks. Some succeed, more or less, and soon the strange piping becomes part of human feasts. Rural festivals, marriages, harvest gatherings all start to feature this cheek-puffing instrument. People don't care that Athena disowned it. They care that it makes their celebrations lively. Historians still argue whether this myth reflects a real transition, from ritual music controlled by priestly elites to more popular rustic traditions embraced by ordinary people. Was the flute ever truly sacred before it became profane? Or was it always destined to be the instrument of the countryside, noisy and unrefined, perfect for letting loose after a long day of labor. The debate continues, because myths often hide kernels of cultural memory. Meanwhile, the flute takes on a personality of its own. It becomes associated not only with satyrs, but also with shepherds, hunters, and anyone who prefers the open hills to the polished marble of city temples. The instrument speaks of freedom, of untamed landscapes, of dancing in the dirt rather than debating in the agora. And of course, the satyrs themselves spread the myth further. They never miss a chance to crash mortal parties. You can picture them weaving through torch-lit banquets, their laughter ringing louder than the flute's notes, their tails swishing with delight. They teach villagers how to hold the instrument, how to let air whistle through, how to puff cheeks until they ache. The mortals laugh, wheeze, and try again, thrilled to make even the roughest squeaks. One quirky tidbit. Some ancient accounts claim the flute could stir emotions too powerfully, overwhelming listeners with joy or sorrow. Imagine being at a feast and suddenly bursting into tears because the piper hit one oddly moving note. Not the vibe you expect when you're 2 cups of wine in. Yet despite the occasional awkward sobbing, the flute's popularity grows. It becomes the sound of rural Greece, winding, repetitive, strangely hypnotic. And because it carries easily, you can hear it across fields, up mountainsides, even echoing in the quiet moments before sleep. By the time you picture this fully, the satyr's prank has become something larger. The flute is no longer a discarded god's mistake. It's the heartbeat of rustic joy, of mortal communities gathering together, of people choosing messy fun over divine perfection. And somewhere, far above, you can almost imagine Athena hearing the distant notes and grimacing again. Of course, once mortals start adopting something, the gods notice. And in the crowded pantheon of Olympus, no invention stays unclaimed for long. You already know who's going to sniff around this noisy reed tube. Dionysus, the eternal party guest who never actually leaves. Picture the scene: vine leaves tangled in his hair, robes that look like they were folded by a toddler, and a grin that says, "Why stop drinking when you can just keep going?" Dionysus arrives where the satyrs are gathered, their flute squealing merrily into the night air. He pauses, head tilted, listening. Then he bursts into laughter, clapping his hands like a delighted child. The flute, to him, is perfect. It's not polished like Apollo's lyre, not strategic like Athena's spear. It's messy, a little embarrassing, and designed to loosen hips and tangle feet in reckless dance. Exactly his kind of thing. Dionysus declares it his new favorite instrument, though to be fair, he says this about almost anything that adds chaos to a party. From this moment, the flute gains a patron. Now it's not just the satyr's toy. It's officially woven into Dionysian festivals. Imagine processions of revelers winding through city streets, carrying torches and jugs of wine. Their laughter mingling with shrill piping. The air smells of grapes, smoke, and sweat. Women whirl in ecstatic dances. Men stumble in rhythm they barely understand. And through it all, the flute shrieks above the din, wild and unstoppable. Mainstream fact. Archaeologists really have uncovered depictions of Dionysian processions featuring the aulos, that's the Greek flute, often shown in the hands of satyrs or maenads. These images suggest the instrument was tightly linked to Dionysus in real cult practices. Quirky tidbit. One legend says the flute could whip dancers into such a frenzy they forgot to stop, sometimes collapsing from exhaustion, still tapping their feet in unconscious rhythm. It's the ancient version of staying out until sunrise because the DJ wouldn't quit. And here's where the scholarly debate creeps in. Historians still argue whether the flute's connection to Dionysus reflects a deliberate cultural split. High instruments like the lyre for serious civic rituals, and low instruments like the flute for emotional, intoxicating celebrations. Was this division about class, religion, or just personal taste in music? No one can quite agree, but the myth spins it another way. In the story, Dionysus embraces what Athena discards. He doesn't mind puffed cheeks or the lack of refinement. To him, flaws are features. The flute belongs not to perfection, but to ecstasy, not to wisdom, but to abandon. And so, night after night, you picture the forests and villages of Greece alive with piping. Torchlight flickers, shadows dance, and mortals lose themselves in the music. It's not about hitting the right note. It's about surrendering to sound, to movement, to joy. The flute becomes a passport to forgetting your worries, if only until dawn. Athena may have invented it, but Dionysus gave it a soul. The flute's popularity doesn't stay confined to rustic villages or wild Dionysian nights. Once something catches fire among mortals, it tends to creep into every corner of society, even the places that pretend to be above it. And so, the aulos slips quietly into city life, sometimes welcomed, sometimes scorned, but always present. Picture Athens on a festival day. The agora hums with chatter, merchants hawking olives and fish, citizens debating politics in tones that sound suspiciously like arguments. And weaving through it all is the sharp, reedy sound of the flute. Street performers play for coins, their cheeks puffed out like bellows. Children clap and dance in circles. Old men grumble about how much better the lyre sounds. But the flute keeps on wailing, stubborn and unashamed. Fact check. In real history, the aulos was used not only in rural parties, but also in religious ceremonies, military marches, and even theater performances. Its sound could accompany tragedies, stirring deep emotions in audiences who were already primed for catharsis. So while Athena might have abandoned it, mortals quickly found practical uses. The quirky tidbit here: ancient Greek athletes sometimes trained to flute music. Imagine lifting weights, or in their case, hurling a discus, while a musician toots away in the corner. Supposedly, the rhythm kept movement steady. Whether it actually worked or just annoyed everyone is a mystery lost to time. And of course, there's debate. Historians still argue whether the flute was seen as morally corrupting. Some sources suggest philosophers like Plato frowned upon it, calling it too emotional, too distracting, too prone to stirring passions instead of reason. Others argue that plenty of Greeks loved it and didn't see any problem with cheeks puffing like a startled pufferfish. Meanwhile, in myth, the flute keeps traveling. Aristocrats commission flute players for dinner parties. Soldiers march to its beat. Sailors bring it on ships to ease long journeys across the Aegean. And still, the satyrs laugh from the shadows, proud of how far their found treasure has gone. But here's the catch. The more the flute spreads, the more it invites conflict. Who owns it now? Athena rejected it. Dionysus embraced it. Mortals reshaped it. And whenever too many hands grab at the same instrument, stories start to tangle, and rivalries take root. You can almost hear the faint beginning of trouble in those piping notes. Trouble that will soon pit gods against mortals, pride against play, and turn the humble flute into the centerpiece of a mythic showdown. The flute is everywhere now, woven into daily life, festivals, theater, even the training grounds of athletes. But popularity always has a way of stirring rivalry. Enter Marsyas, a satyr whose story will soon turn the flute from a playful toy into the centerpiece of one of mythology's most infamous contests. Marsyas is not just any satyr. Unlike his shaggy, goat-legged brothers who are content to stumble through tunes, after a few cups of wine, Marsyas practices. He takes the instrument seriously, coaxing out melodies smoother than you'd expect from a creature with hooves. When he plays, mortals pause their chores, birds tilt their heads, even nymphs usually busy braiding one another's hair or gossiping about gods stop to listen. Marsyas, without meaning to, becomes something rare, a satyr with skill. Fact time. The myth tells us Marsyas discovered the flute precisely because Athena tossed it aside. Some versions say he found it in Phrygia, far from Greece proper, which hints that the story might preserve real cultural exchanges between regions where reed instruments flourished. Here's the quirky twist. Marsyas supposedly believed the flute almost played itself. The sounds were so enchanting that he wondered if magic, not effort, was behind them. That's the kind of confidence that either makes you a genius or gets you into trouble. And trouble arrives in the form of Apollo. Now, Apollo is the poster child for polished music. Golden lyre in hand, perfect hair shimmering like a shampoo commercial, smug smile that says, "I never miss a note." When he hears whispers that a satyr with goat legs dares to rival his artistry, he cannot resist. Pride swells. Curiosity sharpens. Before long, Apollo seeks Marsyas out. Historians still argue whether this contest reflects a symbolic struggle, the lyre representing order, civic harmony, and high culture, while the flute symbolizes passion, chaos, and the rural world. Was the myth a coded story about class conflict? A warning about overstepping boundaries? Or just an ancient version of a battle of the bands? Scholars debate, as they always do. In the grove where the two meet, you can imagine the air thick with tension. Marsyas, clutching his reed pipes, knows he's stepping into dangerous territory. Apollo, radiant in his divine arrogance, twirls his lyre string casually, as though the outcome is already settled. Around them, satyrs, nymphs, and perhaps even a few mortals gather to watch. It's not every day you see a goat man challenge a god. The stakes are unspoken, but heavy. Music is never just sound. It's power, identity, the soul of a culture. If Marsyas wins, the flute, and by extension rustic chaos, proves itself equal to Olympian order. If Apollo wins, well, let's just say Apollo isn't known for his forgiving nature. The first notes are about to ring out, and the forest seems to hold its breath. The contest begins, and you're right there in the grove, watching two very different visions of music square off. On one side, Marsyas, the satyr with shaggy hair, goat legs, and a nervous grin that doesn't quite hide his pride. On the other, Apollo, polished like a marble statue come to life, his golden lyre gleaming in the sunlight. Marsyas starts. He lifts the flute, the very one Athena tossed away, and plays. The sound bursts out sharp and haunting, a melody that swirls like smoke. It's not neat, not symmetrical, but it's alive. Birds scatter from trees, startled yet drawn. Mortals in the crowd feel something stir deep in their chests. Feet start tapping without permission. Even the nymphs who usually roll their eyes at satyrs can't help but sway. Marsyas grins wider, emboldened. Then Apollo steps forward. His lyre hums with grace. Each pluck is precise, crystalline, like drops of water falling in perfect rhythm. The crowd sighs, lulled into calm. It's beautiful, but also safe, expected, rehearsed. Apollo beams, convinced he's already won. Round after round, the two trade music. The flute growls and shrieks, pouring out raw emotion, while the lyre glitters with refined harmony. The audience shifts uneasily between them. Which is better, passion or perfection, disorder or order? Here's a mainstream fact. Myths like this were retold at festivals, often dramatized in theater, where audiences debated these very values. The lyre versus the flute wasn't just a musical argument. It was about philosophy, politics, and identity. Quirky tidbit. One version of the myth claims the judges for the contest were none other than the Muses. And if you're thinking, gee, aren't they kind of biased toward Apollo, their usual golden boy? Well, you'd be correct. And here's the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether this story was meant to caution mortals against challenging the gods, or whether it's a myth about the inevitability of social elites crushing rural upstarts. Either way, the tension builds with every note. At first, it seems Marsyas might actually pull it off. His music is rough but intoxicating, stirring laughter and tears in equal measure. People lean toward him, captivated by his raw energy. But Apollo doesn't like competition. He raises the stakes. With a smug flourish, Apollo flips his lyre and begins to sing along. His voice blends perfectly with the strings, creating a harmony Marsyas can't match. The crowd gasps, impressed. Then Apollo leans in with the kicker. Now you try, play and sing at the same time. Marsyas freezes. His flute demands 2 cheeks, 2 lungs, all his breath. Singing and playing together? Impossible. The crowd murmurs. The contest is lost. You can almost see Apollo's smile widen as Marsyas lowers the flute, defeated. It's not just a win. It's a reminder. God set the rules, and mortals, or satyrs, pay the price when they forget. And though the grove still hums with the memory of Marsyas's wild music, silence now falls, a silence heavy with dread. Because Apollo isn't the type to end things kindly. The silence after Marsyas lowers the flute is almost worse than the music itself. You stand in that grove, the air heavy with expectation, every satyr shifting uneasily, every nymph biting her lip. The contest is over, but Apollo isn't smiling the way a gracious winner might. His grin is too sharp, too pleased with himself. You probably know what comes next, or at least you've heard rumors. Apollo doesn't just accept victory and walk away. He insists on punishment. After all, Marsyas dared to challenge a god, dared to think his goatish fingers and puffed cheeks could rival divine strings. For Apollo, this cannot go unpunished. And so, depending on which storyteller you believe, Marsyas is seized by the followers of Apollo, tied to a tree, and subjected to a fight so unpleasant that ancient poets could barely bring themselves to describe it in detail. The short version? Apollo flays him alive. Yes, strips him of his skin, turning the satyr into a grim lesson carved in flesh. Fact check. This detail does appear in multiple sources of the myth. It was a common enough motif in Greek storytelling, a warning against hubris. Mortals, or satyrs, who overreach against the gods tend to suffer spectacularly. Quirky tidbit. Later traditions claimed the river Marsyas sprang up from the spot where the satyr's blood fell, flowing eternally through Phrygia as a reminder of the contest. You might say Marsyas lost his skin, but gained a river, though that's hardly a consolation prize anyone would want. Scholarly debate time. Historians still argue whether the myth of Marsyas represents an allegory about Greek cultural superiority over Phrygia. Was Marsyas a symbol of barbarian music, exotic and emotional, defeated by Apollo's civilized order? Or was it more about suppressing popular rustic traditions in favor of elite, aristocratic forms? Either way, the story carries heavy cultural baggage. In the grove, though, all you feel is the chill of Apollo's power. The satyrs scatter, horrified. The nymphs avert their eyes. Even the trees seem to sigh in the wind. The flute lies abandoned once more, its bright notes silenced by cruelty. And yet myths have a way of refusing to stay quiet. The memory of Marsyas doesn't vanish. Mortals whisper his story, retell it around fires, murmur it during feasts. They remember the sound of his flute, the way it made their feet dance and their hearts stir. Apollo may have won, but in a strange way, Marsyas also lives on, immortalized not just in punishment, but in the enduring music he brought to human ears. You can almost hear it still, faint piping carried by the breeze, as if Marsyas left echoes behind that even Apollo couldn't strip away. The grove may have fallen silent after Marsyas's fate, but the flute itself refuses to stay buried. Myths are like that. Objects take on lives of their own, carrying echoes of every hand that touched them. Though Apollo may claim the last word, the world keeps humming with the sound Marsyas once coaxed from reeds. Picture a wedding in a small village. The bride's family is bustling. The groom's relatives are debating loudly over sheep dowries, and in the corner, a flute player strikes up a tune. The sound isn't elegant like Apollo's lyre, but it makes the children laugh and the grandparents clap along. No one thinks of Marsyas in this moment, yet his shadow lingers in every puff of air, every reedy squeak. Fact check. In real Greece, the aulos was used at weddings, funerals, and public festivals. It had a versatility that more prestigious instruments lacked. Lyres were tied to education and elite culture, but the flute was for life's messy, emotional moments. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient sources describe flute players competing to see who could blow the loudest or longest without fainting. Imagine passing out mid-song and still being declared the champion. It's equal parts impressive and ridiculous. Historians still argue whether this democratization of music, the flute being played in everyday contexts, represents a subtle resistance to elite control. Did ordinary Greeks embrace it precisely because philosophers like Plato sneered at it? Or was it simply practical, the way people today love guitars at campfires more than polished symphonies? In mythic terms, the flute takes on a curious double life. To Athena, it's an embarrassment. To Apollo, it's a dangerous rival. To Dionysus, it's the perfect party trick. And to mortals, it's everything from background noise for a meal to the heartbeat of a festival. Few objects in mythology wear so many faces at once. And maybe that's why it survives. Gods come and go, heroes rise and fall, but the flute keeps squeaking its way into the fabric of mortal life. You can imagine travelers carrying it across borders, shepherds teaching tunes to their sons, villagers passing reed-making skills through generations. The music becomes less about divine invention and more about human tradition. By now, the flute no longer belongs to Olympus at all. It belongs to the people who laugh, cry, and stumble to its sound. The satyrs may have introduced it, Marsyas may have suffered for it, but in the end, the flute thrives where myths always thrive, in the hands of mortals who keep the story alive, without even knowing they're part of it, and somewhere, drifting across hillsides at dusk, the thin, reedy notes still carry. So here you are, at the end of the flute's strange journey. From Athena's careful hands to satyrs' goatish lips, from Dionysian revels to Apollo's grim victory, the story of this little reed instrument has puffed its way across every corner of myth. What began as a goddess's invention became a symbol of everything she despised. Cheeks puffed, faces distorted, and dignity lost in laughter. And yet, despite her rejection, the flute never vanished. It found new voices, new homes, new meanings. Fact check. Archaeologists have uncovered actual alloy in tombs made of bone, wood, or ivory, sometimes buried with professional musicians. These artifacts remind us that the flute wasn't just a mythic prop. It was real. It was played, and it mattered. Quirky tidbit. Some musicians stuffed little sponges or straps against their cheeks to stop them from ballooning out. Imagine being so committed to aesthetics that you'd MacGyver a sponge harness for your face, all because Athena set the standard. And as always, the debate continues. Historians still argue whether Athena's rejection was a cultural metaphor. Was the flute coded as foreign, a symbol of Phrygia or Anatolia creeping into Greek society? Or was the myth simply a way to pit order against chaos, reason against revelry, Apollo against Marsyas in one endless tug-of-war? But as you drift through this story, you realize the debates don't really matter. What lingers is the sound, reedy, uneven, sometimes shrill, sometimes haunting. The flute becomes less about who invented it and more about who picked it up after it was dropped. Mortals claimed it. Villagers played it at weddings. Soldiers marched to it. Dancers spun until their sandals wore thin. And children, always children, blew awkward notes that made their parents laugh. Athena's invention turned out to be a gift she couldn't bear to keep, but one the world refused to lose. And maybe that's the point. Some creations aren't meant for perfection. They're meant for play, for mess, for the long, imperfect human story that keeps going long after God stopped paying attention. And now, as the last notes of this strange tale fade, let yourself lean back a little deeper. Imagine the sound of the flute softening, no longer shrill, no longer wild, just a gentle breath of air through reeds, a lullaby carried by the wind. You walk away from the grove where Athena once frowned at her reflection. The trees close in softly, their branches swaying like a slow wave. The satyrs are gone now, the laughter dimmed, the torches burned out. All that remains is the memory of music, drifting like mist across the hills. It doesn't demand your attention. It doesn't ask for judgment. It simply floats, quiet and persistent, the way a breeze slides under a door at night. You don't need to hold on to the details anymore. The contests, the punishments, the debates. Let them dissolve, like notes fading into silence. The flute still plays, but it plays only for you now. A tune without urgency, without triumph or failure. Just sound, steady and low, winding around your thoughts like a ribbon. Each breath of the instrument carries away a little weight from your chest, loosening what you didn't realize you were holding. Your body feels heavier, your eyelids slower. The rhythm of the flute is no longer about dancing or revelry. It's about stillness, about settling into rest. Even the gods, even Apollo, even wise Athena must sleep sometimes. And so must you. Let the story recede like footsteps down a long path. The music thins. The world quiets. You are safe, you are still, and you are ready to drift. Good night.